So you're playing in a chess tournament? We'd better go through some important rules. The most important rule is that you must not interfere with anyone else's game. You must not say anything or make any noises that might alert one of the players to be careful. This is cheating, and it spoils the other game for the players. If there is a problem, raise your hand so that someone can come and sort the problem out. It is too late to complain at the end of the game. If you think the game is finished, checkmate or stalemate perhaps, then raise your hand. Someone will come and check to see if the game really is over. Quite often, it isn't checkmate at all. You cannot leave your king in check. If you are in check, then you must move out of check immediately. If your opponent doesn't move out of check, you cannot take their king. You must ask them to take their move back and try again. Also, if your opponent moves into check, you cannot take their king. Again, you must ask them to take their move back and try again. Okay, there's just one more thing to tell you. The dreaded touch move rule. There are 3 parts to the touch move rule, so listen carefully. If you touch one of your own pieces, then you must move it if you can. So only if moving that piece is allowed by the rules of chess. If you touch one of your opponent's pieces, then you must take it if you can. So only if taking that piece is allowed by the rules of chess. And finally, if you move your piece and let go of it, then that is where your piece has to stay. But again, only if that move is allowed by the rules of chess. So be safe. Don't touch any pieces until you are absolutely sure of your move. If you want to adjust your piece to the middle of the square, then tell your opponent before you touch it. Right, let's look at some examples. Okay, let's have a look at this position. It is White's turn to move. White notices that the knight on b6 is attacked by 2 black pieces, the queen and bishop, and it is only defended by the white queen. So White decides to move the knight and touches it. But then White notices that if the knight moves, then Black will play queen takes queen. So White decides to look for a better move. In this case, even though moving the knight is a bad idea, White has touched the knight and has to move it. Now let's suppose that White does not touch the knight on b6, but looks for a way to defend it. White picks up the knight on e3 and moves it to d5. Black notices that the bishop is attacking the white king and decides to take it. No, 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 no! You cannot take the king. What Black must do is tell White to move the knight back again and play a different move. The knight on e3 is pinned to the king. It cannot move at all, and so even though White touched the knight, White doesn't have to move it. White must find another piece to move. Okay, let's suppose that White decides to defend the knight on b6 by moving the rook from c2 to b2. White moves the rook and lets go of it. White then notices the black bishop on d4 and picks the rook back up again to move it somewhere else. Is White allowed to do that? No. Once White has let go of the rook on b2, it must stay there. White decides to ignore the knight on b6 and picks up the pawn on f4 and takes the black knight on g5. What happens in this case? Black tells White that the pawn is pinned by the rook on f8 and so it can't take the knight on g5. So is White allowed to move a different piece? In this case, no. The pawn can move forward to f5. As White has touched the pawn, White has to play this move. But what if white wants to take the black knight with the pawn, but picks up the knight first? As we have seen, white cannot take the knight with the pawn. What happens now? Well, because white has touched black's knight, white must take the knight if possible. Can you see what move white has to make? Unfortunately for white, the queen can take the knight, and that is what white has to do, even though the black pawn on h6 is waiting to gobble her up. Let's finish with a very silly example of a touch move mistake. White decides to get the queen out early. The chess tutor must be furious. But black decides to touch the king. This is an unfortunate mistake. There is only one move the king can make. Can you spot what white will do next?